You're listening to Missing Panther.
Thought this is ridiculous. An Australian photographing prints of an animal in Africa that look the same as the prints he's seen in Growth File. In front of the car, he saw a black animal crossing.
I remain absolutely convinced that we have a breeding population of some form of big black cat in the Blue Mountains and Wollomai National Parks.
And as we came down across the dam wall, two black cats jumped out of the tree.
They were still clearly the prints of a big cat, probably a female leopard.
We both stopped dead in our tracks and look up, and then out from behind this big main tree, what we saw was a huge black cat.
And the interesting thing about these sightings is, the more time passes, the less you believe your own eyes.
There are countless myths and legends across Australia about black panthers.
Government officials are investigating a second sighting of a puma-sized cat.
The movement was of a cat and of a very large size.
Officials from the Department of Primary Industries are expected to look for paw prints tomorrow.
This new investigation comes from the top. Premier will be hoping that solving the big cat mystery will be the first of many victories.
It's easy for all of us to dismiss these things as urban myths, but if we're actually wrong, then there's an altogether different set of scenarios.
There have been sightings in the Hawkesbury, and there are endless stories of huge black cats bounding around in front of cars, sheep being mauled to death on property.
The DPI says it won't comment any further until its investigations are complete.
The question is, if they were just feral cats, would they always be black?
No, absolutely not.
And that report by the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries is due early in the new year.
I began this journey all because of a childhood discovery. Finding 3 mysterious creatures high up in the hollow of a willow tree has later on in my life set me on a path to find out more about big cats in this country. Along the way, many people keep asking me, whatever happened to them? When I pulled these unknown little creatures from the duck's hollow, Daz and I sat with them under the tree for what seemed like an eternity, trying to figure out what the hell they were. We had a pretty solid grasp on most Australian animals, both native and introduced, so we began the process of elimination. Ruling out, to the best of our knowledge, things like foxes, quolls, feral cats, possums and so on, and in the end, coming up with nothing. So, how did they get so high up in the willow tree? Were they taken there by a bird of prey? And if so, why were there no claw marks or bite marks, or any other sign of injury? With all of these unanswered questions, we still had to move before we'd break the one very stern rule from our parents: be home before dark. The sun was slowly disappearing behind the distant hills, and we had a few miles of trespassing to endure before getting back home. Our new friends were clearly getting hungry and becoming distressed. So we stuffed them in the backpack and decided we'd take them to the local vet the very next day. Scaling barbed-wire fences on such a high, we could barely hear the distant abuse from Old Man Dowling. As he sat on his porch, watching us run straight through the middle of his property, we were always convinced he had us lined up through a sniper rifle. So, through what can only be described as childhood genius, we used our evasive zigzag running technique, which we both agree is the only reason that we're still alive today. When we got home, we convinced the parents that these were nothing more than abandoned pets, so we got the green light to keep them. I kept 2 and Daz kept the other one. The next day, we took them to the local vet to get some formula and finally get an expert to identify them. The vet's evaluation? Well, they certainly look feline, but the legs and paws resembling the size of a dog's, I can't be too sure until they grow a bit more. Being kids, we accepted his evaluation, but both of us walking out thinking the same thing. Thanks for nothing. For 2 weeks, I was kept up all night from the squealing of these hungry little critters. And unfortunately, coming home from school one afternoon, the worst I'd feared had happened. To protect me from the pain, Mum had already disposed of them, and for me, that chapter had closed. The one Daz took home lasted no more than a week longer. Whatever they were, and no matter what we did, they just wouldn't adapt, and for a long time afterwards, we felt horrible about it. Years later, my interest was sparked again when I saw a documentary showing newborn leopard cubs. Even though it was a distant memory, I couldn't differentiate. Jumping to conclusions, I called National Parks and Wildlife and told them the whole story. They quickly put me onto the DPI, or as it was known back then, the Department of Agriculture. It got their attention straight away. After sending the only copies of the photos I had to their very own exotic wildlife specialist, he convinced me that a forensic team was to come out and dig up Daz's yard, where he buried his years earlier. He told me that what we had found might just match everything he believed to be out there. This was it. In my mind, we had found newborn cubs of what everyone had been claiming to see for decades, the Black Panther. The high was incredible. Being a kid, I already had visions of my future, driving around in a beefed up F100 with a Panther mural on the side, high-tech cameras and heat-sensing equipment in the back, and written on the sides in large bold font, Panther Patrol. But as weeks and months passed by, I continued to stack cauliflowers and pumpkins inside a busy fruit and veg market. The reality kicked in. I was never to be the great Panther Patrol officer for my local area. My destiny was in the filthy back docks of the market, chopping pumpkins and specialising in the art of shrink wrap. My phone calls were never returned, and my photos were never sent back to me, even after multiple requests. I knew I'd been led on, and for what? With no answers and no explanation for the silence, the journey and excitement ended. But it didn't end everything. My love for panthers and big cat stories in this country just grew stronger.
I shone my torch through the thicket and there were two green eyes staring at me.
There it was, big, large black cat.
So we all stopped and stared at this matte black, beautiful animal, which was a leopard.
Jet black, it had the long flowing tail.
A panther just walked in front of the car.
You know, I've seen a lot of things get killed in my life, but I've never seen anything that kills like this thing does.
A mate of mine and myself found the goat in the tree, and the pug mark in the tree was a cracker.
Mate, I have seen a lot of things in my life, hunted since I was a kid, and I said I've never seen sheep killed like this in my whole life.
After every interview I conduct, I save each recording into location folders. One of them, in particular, was filling up quite fast. The Hawkesbury Files. The Hawkesbury shares a border with the Blue Mountains and Wollemi National Parks, where many sections are still to this day totally inaccessible. So inaccessible, in fact, that 40-metre high prehistoric Wollemi pine trees were only discovered in 1994, sitting there for years, not hiding, not trying to get away. The Hawkesbury is also just up the road from an old zoo, which was surrounded by rumours of exotic animal escapes, as well as its owner releasing big cats which were no longer fit for public display. Some of the stories we already heard in episode 4, The Fugitives. When the local paper, the Hawkesbury Gazette, ran a story on my podcast, they were kind enough to place a call out for anyone who believes they'd seen a panther in the area. The emails came in so fast I almost required a staff member. My first interview is with Kirsten, who owns and operates Kersco Film Animals. Kirsten trains all sorts of animals for the big screen, including big cats. I was referred to Kirsten by a local biologist who told me if I wanted to speak with an expert, then she'd be the perfect person to chat with.
When I graduated from uni, I got a job as an apprentice film animal trainer, and in that position I trained all sorts of animals, including I was on a film with a black leopard. He wasn't a leopard that I trained, but he lived at the same location where we lived, so I hung out with him every day because I love leopards. And then after that, I won a Churchill Fellowship. And that got me into Hollywood, training with the world's best film animal trainers. I spent a week with the bird trainer, 3 weeks with the horse trainer, and 10 weeks with a big cat trainer. So I learnt a lot from the big cat trainer. He has leopards, lions, tigers, pumas. His leopards are extremely well trained. They come into the house at night, they sleep on our beds. When we go to a job, by law, we have to keep them in cages. So on the way back from the job, to thank them for the work they did on set, we get into the cages with them and give them a massage, because as all cats love massages, they do too, yes. So I have spent a lot of time with big cats, and as far as hands-on time with big cats, there'd be few people in the world that have spent as much time taking big cats for a walk and patting them and working them. That's how I really do know what a leopard looks like. The year was approximately 2017. It was an extremely hot summer, and so I got up very early and I was heading up to a national park to go for a ride. And I heard on the news that they had closed all the national parks up that way because of the potential for fires. So I turned around and I went back to Skyville National Park because it's all surrounded by suburbia and I knew there were no fires in there on that day. I went for a ride and I was in the middle of Skyville Park, somewhere in between the hours of 5:30am and 6am, probably closer to 5:30am. And I was on a flat bit with grass that was about a foot high, and both the horses, I was riding one horse and the other one was running along beside me at liberty. And both the horses suddenly pricked their ears up at this black thing on the ground. So of course I looked at it too because I knew they were looking at it. So we all just stopped and stared at this matte black, beautiful animal, which was a leopard. It was standing in profile to us. I got a really good look at its body and its tail. It was looking at us. He stood there for, it seemed like probably 30 seconds, just stock still looking at us, and then his head faced forwards, which was to our side, and he just walked off. He didn't seem scared by us. He certainly didn't seem aggressive. He was interested in us and he had seen us, and then he decided to walk off. The leopards I've worked with are quite big in size, like they might have a bit of jaguar in them. The leopard I saw in Skyville wasn't quite as big as those leopards, but he or she was by no means a small leopard. I would say it was average size for a pure leopard, which it looks very much like a purebred leopard. I could actually see, in certain lights, you can still see the spots on black leopards because they very much do have spots. In other lights, they appear completely black. I actually could see an outline of some of his spots. That matte black fur was just far too matte black to be anything but a black leopard, and certainly his body shape, he was far too big to be a domestic cat or even some sort of crossbred cat. And to me, the big telltale sign is not only the size, but having a tail that is the same length as the body. And as he walked off, he was in profile, so I could clearly see that tail following his body, and it was definitely as long as his body. There's been so many sightings, they must be breeding out there too, because leopards don't normally live more than about 20 years, so I was just frozen watching this beautiful animal and thinking, wow, how lucky am I to see it?
Growing up in India, Ken is only too familiar with living near areas known to have big cats, but the one place he didn't expect to be so close to them was Grossvale.
This all started for me growing up in India and seeing big cats in the wild about 8 times that I can remember through my youth, and including one instance where there was a black leopard or a panther jumped across the road in front of us. Yeah, look, I mean, while growing up in India, we would have a month or so's holiday up in the hill areas of southern India. One of the cottages that my parents rented, there were 4 kids in my family, myself and a brother and 2 sisters, and we would play in this property, and we kids would play at the bottom end of the yard and then jump over the fence, and there was a bit of a cave there, and we played in that cave for a month. It was only after we left that we found out that that cave complex was home to a panther, or a leopard, sorry, that had been known to have been living there for at least 4 years. In India, the leopard lives side by side with human habitation without caring. But we never saw it, didn't even suspect there was anything there. Just thankful that we didn't stumble on it and trap it, because I think if you stumble upon it when it's in the open, it'll just go away from you. But if you happen to get between it and the open cave, and it's behind you in the cave, it's going to go you as it tries to get its way out. In one of the national parks in India, there are known to be over 125 large cats. Okay? There's a board at one of the parks that says when the last sighting of tiger, last sighting of leopard, and invariably tigers are seen, within the last week. But leopard, man, you can go 40 days without somebody seeing a leopard. They're a very elusive animal by comparison to tiger or even lion in Africa. The leopard is just a smart animal. Now, I visited that park as a kid. I visited it as an adult more recently. I've never seen a big cat in that park. There was a walled university compound in which there was known to be a leopard, and it took them months to track it down. Right? And it was only a university compound of maybe, I think, less than 20 acres. And yet trying to track it and capture it was almost impossible. So these are very clever animals.
Back in Australia now, Ken shares with me his encounter.
In 1996, of an evening, I had a dog and a cat but we'd only recently got the dog. The cat didn't like the dog, but both of them were at the back door scrabbling to come inside. So I just walked over and said, "What's spooked the animals?" And as I opened the door, the cat bolted inside and just took off up the bedroom and hid under the bed. We didn't see her for about 4 or 6 hours. The dog just simply went and cowered, shaking behind my wife's legs as she was standing at the kitchen bench. So I walked outside, I heard a rustle up in the bush, walked about 5-10 metres up to our fence line, looked up a fire trail and saw a panther bound through the track. I walked back inside and said to my wife, "Look, if we were living in India, I'd tell you I've just seen a panther. I'm convinced of what I saw. Of all the years of collecting data since, nothing has changed my mind. I'm still absolutely convinced there's a breeding population." I even took some photographs of paw prints with me on a trip to India. That was in '99, and I showed them to a group of 6 national parks rangers. And I said, "Look, can you guys identify these paw prints just by looking at them?" And the first person just said, "Oh, feeled," right? So I said, "Cat." He said, yeah, that's cat." I said, "Anything?" Because there was a tape measure beside, or ruler beside the paw prints. He said, "Anything else you can say?" And he gave me a size and he gave me a weight. He said, "That's probably around about a 50-kilogram cat from the size of those paw prints and so on." And then he said, "Oh, where's the picture from?" And I said, "Oh, west of Sydney." And their immediate response was, "Oh, so you've got an escapee out there." That was exactly the words they said. They were fascinated that we might have, and from the photographic evidence that I've just shown them, that we did have a large cat of some sort out here. The panther that I saw back in '96 is bigger than my current dogs. And I'm absolutely convinced that that's what it was that I saw, coming from a place of experience of having seen them in the wild in my youth. So.
Living in the Hawkesbury region, Karen was only too familiar with stories of the mysterious panther, but one day she would have a story of her very own.
My brother had moved up to live with me from Adelaide, 2003, and he called me one morning. I live on 10 acres in a very bushy property along a creek line with caves and a massive lake. He called me out urgently to come and see a massive cat that was coming down towards my chook pen at 6:30 in the morning. It's about 50 metres from the house. As soon as he yelled out to me, it looked up and sort of then turned around and raced off. So he had seen it, was adamant what he saw, could show me the size of it. And I said to him, well, I've never seen it, but I have been told about it, describing as the way people do, about the size of a Labrador, but with a great long tail and funny, tidgy, round sort of ears on the side more than on top of its head. In 2005, in October 2005, at 11:30am is when I saw it. Again on my property, and I was unpacking my car and I was taking a rest sitting on the tailgate of the car, so I was sitting quite still and just looking up sort of through the bush and listening to birds and things, and this animal came over the top of the rise down a game trail, and the minute I saw it I sort of thought, oh, that's sort of simultaneously you think, God, what's that? It's a dog. No, it's not, because look at it. It's got a head like a soccer ball. It's got no long muzzle. Its ears are sort of on the side of its head and its shoulders are rolling. So it was walking directly towards me down a hill, and I could see the long tail out and sort of curving like an umbrella handle behind it. And it continued to walk down the hill towards me, about 30 metres up a hill, and then it turned side on at about 20, well, I've measured all these things, it was almost 20 metres away when it turned side on and continued along a game trail. And then I could see it on side-on vision. That's when the thickness of the legs and the shortness of them for what should have been a dog that size, if you know what I mean. Like the legs were like tree trunk thick, sort of compared to what you would expect on an animal you would be expecting to see of that size. And it was completely black. It moved behind a tree, at which point it spun round, crouched down, sort of tucked its back legs back under and sat there, and I just said, oh bugger, it's seen me, it's going to take off. And by taking 2 more steps I put my garage between it and me, and I raced inside to go and get a camera, but when I came out it had taken off. When I eventually found someone to contact and then did a report by email, because I didn't want to be interviewed, I wanted to write everything I'd seen and then someone could talk to me. She asked if she could send it to a big cat expert that worked in the zoo, and he actually contacted me and said, you realise what happened? That cat tucking its back legs and crouching like that was a I'm going to jump on you action. He said that's what they do. The way I absolutely described what it had done when it had seen me and obviously being startled. Sometimes I wish I'd never seen it, only because it has consumed a lot of time and attending a lot of meetings. I know that it was 100% Black Panther that I could walk down to the zoo and point to and say that's what I saw.
A month ago, the Premier had his doubts. That was until he spoke to Grossvale resident Chris Coffey. She first saw the animal in 1998. Then in 2003, an inquiry found that it was more likely than not that a colony of big cats is roaming Sydney's outskirts and beyond.
After more than one big cat encounter herself, Hawkesbury resident Chris Coffey became so involved in the topic of big cats that the media came knocking on her door every time a new sighting would pop up.
Before we saw it, one of my neighbours saw it, and I've got to be honest with you, I did say to her, okay, what have you been drinking and smoking, you know? And she actually was doing fencing on a property, and because she just took off, she faced it, and thank goodness it ran when she ran. And that's the worst thing she could have possibly done, because she made eye contact and she ran. That's something you'd never do. She's a lucky girl. I've got 5 acres of garden, and I had a woman working for me, and we were doing the final walk around, and I go down into a gully, and it was there eating a lyrebird. The cat was there eating a lyrebird on my property at the back. And look, I tell you what, it took off. It went around the hill so fast. It's as big as a Rottweiler dog. I've had several Rotties, and they've been around the 65 kilo mark. It's a big animal. It is no feral cat gone big. It's not. It marked its territory in my front garden, right? And then it left the most disgusting scat. Oh, the smell, it was horrendous. And you could see chomped bone, fleece like sheep's wool, masticated feathers. Now, only cats masticate feathers, right? So if a dog eats a feather, it comes out the other end as a feather because they cannot masticate it, whereas a cat can. And you could see it all in there.
I asked Chris if the media attention and ridicule got a bit much after a while.
It was, it was pretty hurtful when it was all happening, Yeah, but I don't want any more ridicule, I must admit. Yeah, I've had people ring me up and laugh, and I've just seen a big cat and it was wearing pink pajamas and this and oh my goodness. Nuisance calls. The stigma that goes with it is horrendous. And I swore I'd never talk to another person about it. Look, so many people don't report it because of the media saying that, we're all idiots. My husband was watching it and I got to the point where I said, turn it off. No, they really treated me shockingly. You know what? They classified me here as the street idiot or the street nutter. Every street's got one, so that's how my neighbours treated me. All we have ever asked for is just a public warning for people who live on the fringe of the bush and bushwalkers to be vigilant. One piece of paper is all we want. I'm a tenacious bitch. I know what I saw. I know it's here. And I will stick by it, But as far as television, radio, interviews, no more. If you live in the bush like we have for the years that we've been here, you know that that's a wallaby, that's a wombat, that's a this, whatever. And a cat. I'm talking something the size of my Rottweiler. It is not a large feral cat. And these cats are right up the Great Divide. I do believe that they're still out there, but like I say, people will not come forward because of the stigma.
No strangers to a media circus, Sally and Dan filmed what they described as a big cat. When Sally later uploaded the footage to social media, things escalated quickly.
We were just taking a drive. My daughter had her friend over for the day and we thought we'd take a drive out to go and have a barbecue and do some fishing. Had a barbecue for lunch. So we took a drive. It's quite an isolated kind of area. It's quite remote. While we were there, that's when we kind of noticed this massive big cat. I said, stop the car. And the 4 of us jumped out and I grabbed my phone straight away. And I remember I kept saying, that is massive. It's huge. The first thing that I remember was that it was just how it was slinking along. Just walking along through the paddock
and low to the ground, and it was almost doing like a zigzag motion.
But then I noticed the dip in its tail, and I thought to myself, that's not a domestic cat. So I took the video, and then we drove home, which would have been about an hour and a half drive. By the time I got home, I'd uploaded the video and it pretty much started to gather a lot of attention. I think we reached at least 100,000 views within 24 hours, maybe even more than that, which is why it, was considered to go viral. And we had, I think the first radio station to contact us was Kiss FM. Funnily enough, they had been running a segment that weekend and they had sent out one of their reporters to have a look for the Black Panther.
We had Channel 9 contact us at about 9 o'clock that evening asking for an exclusive for the Today Show. and they had organised a live morning slot for the next morning where a camera crew come out and we went local to film it. You know, the three major radio stations.
Yeah.
We did the Today Show, and we also had 2 slots on the major news. So,
and then other radio stations like the Today FM with Grant Dania, a few other local newspapers picked it up. Mike that had written that book about the big cats, a few of those people that were doing research had contacted us as well. News outlets in the UK that picked it up as well. So
it was all, yeah, from what I can gather, it was shared in something like 8 different languages because it went absolutely viral. Of course, you're going to get a bit of, you know, tongue-in-cheek or a little bit of comedy out of it. And, you know, we expected that. That was fine. And I wouldn't have gone into to do any of those interviews if I, you know, didn't have a thick skin. You know, it is what it is. We film what we filmed. That's all we did. We just filmed a big black cat. I never said it was a panther. I said it was a big black cat.
We're pretty private people, but we're quite honest. So we don't really have time for drama. This was something that we were willing to stand by our word and put ourselves out there to back up what we saw. Up until, I think it was around that 48-hour mark when we started receiving a few threats. Allegedly, it was the person's property that we taped the big cat on, and it would have been some of their friends kind of joined in on the bandwagon. And I said, oh, look, if you want to have a conversation, just, you know, give me a call or private message me, but they wouldn't do that.
They were more concerned about hordes of people coming out to look for this big black cat.
They started making some threats towards us, things that included, you know, we'll find out where you live, we're going to find out where your kids go to school. Yeah, it got a little bit ridiculous. That's when we kind of thought, okay, there might be a little bit more at play here. We might be dealing with some people that have some mental health issues. So that's when I had said to them, okay, no worries, I'll take the video down. So it was quite an anxious kind of 48, 72 hours. Like we would lay awake in bed at night and go, wow, like, you know, this is a little bit crazy. I don't know how people deal with this kind of spotlight on them all the time. You know, something's out there, and I think we'll just see a lot, you know, many more sightings of them to come.
Sylvia was driving near Yarramundi when something jumped right out in front of her car.
I was barreling along that road towards the path, and there was a water truck in front of me. Just before the bridge, this very, very large animal came out on the left, crossed the road very quickly in front of the water truck, and re-entered the bush on the right. And I got a really good look at it. And then, like 5 seconds later, I was like, still driving, I was like, that wasn't a dog. As I had time to process what I'd seen, it was low to the ground. It had a very long tail. It moved like a cat, and it was huge. Like, he came out so close to that truck and moved out of the way of it, like, so fast. That was a big cat. And it wasn't like seeing like a feral moggy and then you'd say, oh, that was a really big moggy. It was my first instinct hadn't even been to think it was a cat because it was so big. There was this kind of a sequel to this the next day. I arrived at work. There was a bloke, this old fellow who used to bring his little portable radio, and he had his own little spot on site where he would, you know, like be working and listening to his radio all day. And he came up to me at lunchtime and said there was a radio report on the station that he was listening to that the panther had been spotted in South Windsor the next day, which was very, very close to where I saw it. So there was a sighting the very next day after I saw it in almost the same area. I used to say, I always say to people, it's like, you know, one of those hillbillies who said they got abducted by aliens, that's how you feel. But it doesn't bother me because I also understand the impulse to not believe it as well, because it doesn't make sense and it is crazy. I mean, absolutely no doubt about what I saw.
Brendan was quite well known in the Hawkesbury as a big cat researcher and finally found what he was looking for.
The dogs were looking at something, so I walked over to see what it was, and there it was, big, large black cat. I'm a avid hunter, been a hunter my whole life. I've shot a lot of feral cats and trapped a lot of feral cats, and this was what I'd been searching for a long time and heard about. And I watched it, and it walked down a grassy hill. Still hadn't seen me yet. It walked up to a black wattle, which was full of white-winged choughs, the birds. They all fleed, and he walked around the tree smelling it, rubbing his head around the base of this black wattle. So I jumped up on a stump. At that point, he sighted me. He looked at me, stared me in the eyes. I stared him in the eyes. He, from that point, leapt mid-road. He leapt onto the other embankment and ran on a 45-degree down into the scrub line of the creek. I watched it for I probably couldn't have got a better look. It probably felt like 10 years, but probably only went on for, I don't know, probably 30 seconds or so. But I got interviewed by a lot of the radio stations, and that, I'd had been pursuing this animal and assisting, in the search. So yeah, it was pretty much fed to me with a platter. I work in the helicopters, and I've flown that country. I fly the Wallamai, Yango, Blue Mountains. But watching some of those areas, and you think, if anything was released or did get itself into some of that country, it's not coming out, and it could thrive.
As more and more sightings were coming out of the Hawkesbury, people had nowhere to report their encounter without the risk of being made to feel stupid. That's when Chris Coffey, Ken and Karen banded together to form a database where people could make a report on what they saw without any influence or judgment.
Chris Coffey compiled a list of 375 sightings and passed them on to the Premier.
Perhaps it's time, with a bit more volume in the database, to have another look at the records.
Witnesses' details were kept totally confidential at all times. I asked the Grossvale group if they were able to share a few stories from the database.
Oh, mate, there's too many. There's heaps. And I've got, mums of little kids ringing me up, and they're hysterical, absolutely hysterical, because their child has come so close to it. Say somebody in the Hawkesbury sees it, they ring Hawkesbury City Council, and then they refer them to me, and I interview them. And we do keep it, confidential. We don't hand out people's names or anything like that. It is strictly confidential. I know of a couple of skeptics who didn't believe it, and when they saw it, oh man, what a different attitude. You should see it, you should see it. I have. With all these people, or the DPI saying that people are seeing wallabies or large feral cats, we're talking doctors, dentists, solicitors, police officers, police detectives, and I know of a national parks guy that saw huge prints and said, just be careful, there is a big cat out there. They're just some of the witnesses. Are they all stupid, are they?
For those where the policeman out on a jog on a fire trail in the lower Blue Mountains watches this animal for 15 seconds, he's panic-struck as he's watching it, but it simply walks away from him, where you get a Rural Fire Service driver watches the animal for 15 to 20 seconds bound along the road beside his personnel carrier, where you get the Waterboard employee below Warragamba Dam watches the big cat for 15 minutes, where you get the mayor of a city on a boat tour on the Hawkesbury River and the Nepean River. As the boat comes round the corner, there's a large black cat crouching at the water's edge drinking, gets up and bounds off into the bush. All of these things get added to the database, but as we listened to what they had to say, it became evident that they had seen a very large black cat. And one or two instances where I'm convinced they had actually also seen a puma-like, tawny-coloured cat. A large feral, as you said, might hit 18, 19 kilograms at the absolute top. But when you're talking, as I said, the paw prints, I showed those guys in India, the rangers in India, that their response was a 50 kg cat. I spoke with a gentleman who'd been a animal tracker in Rhodesia, immigrated to Australia. He had tracks behind his house here in the Hawkesbury. And he said from his tracking experience, he was looking at a 60 kilogram cat. 60 kgs, 20 kgs, nothing the same. Look, I even had one National Parks district officer say to me that she and her staff were convinced there was a breeding population of some black cat in the Blue Mountains of Walmart National Park. I asked her to put it in writing. Her immediate response wasn't worth her job. I remember one National Parks ranger who gave me a very hard time for a number of years, saying he'd gone throughout national parks for years, he'd never seen evidence of a big cat. A couple of years after he retired, he called me up, most apologetically, said, look, I need to call and apologise. He'd just driven down the Putty Road, and at some unearthly hour of the morning, he'd come around the corner. He said, Ken, eating roadkill was a large cat and two cubs. And he said the large cat was off the road in a flash, but the cubs, obviously not quite so alert as their mother, just basically sauntered off the road. That's the kind of stuff that's happened to me over the years since '96.
Within those reports, even just in my local area, there was a dog that was taken to the vet and the man and his son had seen the cat whilst walking with their dog. The dog had taken off. They raced after trying to get the dog back. They heard screaming and found it completely ripped apart and lacerated, and did take it to a local vet and ended up with a vet report that said, I have no idea what it was. If a vet says there's nothing in the Australian bush that can do this, we have reports of their own people, the own Department of Primary Industries man watching it through binoculars. He was doing a feral goat count up in the Megalong Valley in New South Wales, and he watched it and documented it. I believe it was certainly more than 10 minutes. You know, and their own people are reporting what they have seen. What does that say?
Although the group from Grossvale had copped their fair share of sneering from some of the members of the community, they stood strong in what they knew to be true and continued to remain a safe space for reporting encounters in the Hawkesbury area. Finally, some relief and a little extra dash of credibility came to the group when District Veterinarian Dr. Keith Hart came on board. Not only was Dr. Hart a well-respected vet, one of his personal hobbies was travelling to Africa and tracking down leopards.
I graduated in 1975 as a veterinarian, and I was always interested in large animal medicine, particularly farm animal medicine. And a job came up as a district veterinarian working for New South Wales. I took it, and my job was to advise and assist farmers with herd medicine issues. And also I had a job on behalf of the New South Wales State Government as a kind of stock policeman, policing several acts of legislation. So sometimes I had to wear one hat and sometimes I had to wear another, which was a bit tricky. I've always been fascinated by Africa. I went there for the first time in 1989, fell in love with the place hopelessly, and I've been back probably every second year on average since. And in the process of my travels, I've certainly seen quite a bit of leopards, and I've been involved in leopard tracking with experts. I've spent a bit of time with a couple of leopard experts. I've seen lots of leopards in South Africa, Zambia, and to a lesser extent Namibia, but particularly South Africa in the Sabi Sands area, which is to the southwest of Kruger National Park. The leopards are habituated to humans there, and so they just ignore vehicles and they do their own thing. So, you know, that's where you really get to see leopards, and they're fascinating animals, and I'm a little bit obsessed with them because they're just extraordinary. When this call came in 1998, when I went to Grossvale, at Chris Coffey's place, following up a report of a sighting of a black panther, there were 5 witnesses there that she'd collected, all of whom had seen it at some time within the previous 12 months, and they were all obviously intelligent, credible people. Chris had actually had a set of footprints. She'd put flower pots over the top of them to preserve them. They were still clearly the prints of a big cat, probably a female leopard. I often thought when I went to Africa and I saw and photographed leopard prints, I thought, this is ridiculous. An Australian photographing prints of an animal in Africa that look the same as the prints he's seen in Grossvale. I had to be sceptical. I'd heard about the whole stories of the big cats before, and I didn't say that was impossible, but I just didn't have a credible pathway as to how they could be there. As I said before, it's difficult when you've got 5 intelligent, credible people who are prepared to put their own reputations on the line to a stranger with some level of official presence on Chris Coffey's place to back up what she was saying. Not only the sighting, but the prints were there. And I've done more autopsies on ruminants than you've had hot dinners. I mean, that was part of my job, to diagnose disease on farms by doing autopsies on animals that had died from that disease. Okay, and the classic one was the 35 kilogram Angora goat. So I know my way in and out of a carcass very, very well. But I had never, ever seen in all that time, and I've done, probably thousands of goat autopsies in my 38-year career. I had never, ever seen a carcass that was killed like that goat. The meat had been meticulously picked from the skeleton. Basically, all that was left was the intact skin, which couldn't have been a human couldn't have done, with a knife couldn't have done a better job, plus the skull, plus the attached backbone with the meat picked off it. Now, you've got to ask yourself, as I did, and as the people who are with me asked, what is there in the Australian bush that's capable of doing that? And the answer comes back, nothing. There's no way that was done by a wild dog. There's something out there capable of killing animals in a way that I've never seen before. Remember that I worked for an organisation that had a responsibility for feral animals, and I would have had to report back that there's something there that really needs to be investigated, because I've never seen anything like this before. This is not in our conventional suite of pest animals or native predators in Australia. There is no way a dog could do that. That had to, given the size of it and the kind of incisions that were made in the muscle, that had to be a big cat. Leopards instinctively often take their prey up into trees, particularly in Africa, to protect them from lions, other leopards, hyenas, jackals, and for some reason even the vultures won't touch a leopard kill in a tree. So that's why they do it, and I guess it's an instinctive thing. There's no competition, so there's no real reason for them to do that, which would be why, if we're right about there being leopards in the Grosse Vale area, why carcasses in trees are rare. There was enough information locally, and I also had some information professionally about a zoo in that Western Sydney area, which had a breeding population of black panthers. I was in a professional situation. I can't deal with, much as I'm interested in, the whole Australia-wide phenomenon of big cats. This was my district, and I had a responsibility to report something to the authorities, but it had to be credible, so I had to have the whole cycle covered. Of course, they didn't like the suggestion that it could have come from this particular zoo, because they were responsible for policing it. In terms of survival in the Australian bush, there is nothing that would present a risk to any leopard once it reaches weaning age. A small cub could be taken by an eagle or by a fox or something like that, but they're very well protected by their mums. So once a leopard reaches adulthood, it's going to die of old age or disease. Nothing else can take out a leopard in the Australian bush. There's a lot of completely naive prey in that area of bush. I mean, we're talking about a consummate predator, and most of their skills are instinctive. Not all, but most of them are instinctive. Finding and killing wallabies would be a piece of cake for a leopard. There's plenty of wallabies and kangaroos in the Blue Mountains National Park, and they have no defence against a predator like this. They've never had, from an evolutionary point of view, had to come across and defend themselves against a predator like this. It'd be a piece of cake. Sabi Sands area of South Africa, you see the leopards because they're habituated. In areas where leopards are not habituated, if they don't want to be seen, 99% of the time they won't be seen. We're talking about an animal that is extremely clever and, very, very attuned to hiding itself.
Mike Williams has spent several years collecting big cat fur and paw prints, even big cat poo.
So unless there's someone going out and faking prints, faking scats, faking kills, and managing to dress up in a big cat costume, we've got something here.
800 interviews, 8,000 hours, 80,000 words. Mike and Rebecca have now published Australia's Big Cat Bible. How many people now have seen this thing?
That we're aware of, several thousand at the very least.
The first book I ever read on the story of big cats was Australian Big Cats, written by Mike Williams and Rebecca Lang. Mike and Rebecca spent a good part of their lives researching the stories of big cats right around Australia. So I reached out to Mike to talk about what got him interested in big cat sightings and how his research ended up focusing on the Hawkesbury.
October the 20th, 2001, Australian crypto series of lectures, and I was filming for my girlfriend Rebecca, and I didn't know much about the cryptids at that stage. I was interested in sort of other areas of weirdness, and I heard the different reports, and there was one really good lecture on Australian big cats, and I was fascinated by it. I went, this is really interesting, and that started the whole madness. I had a couple of minor personal experiences which actually reinforced it, and they happened initially after 2001. One of the first experiences was just south of Maryborough. I was with an ex-farmer who showed me land where he'd seen it. He pointed at animals that had died. He was inferring it was mysterious. So what we did was we stayed the night in the forest, and I got up early morning with these other people, and I had a really primitive form of night viewing device. And I was looking down, just on the crack of dawn, I was looking down a slope, and there was a waterhole about, 150 metres away. And I was waving the device around. And at one stage, when I've gone back over the waterhole, because we're looking at the high side, there was a thing sitting on top of the waterhole. And I'm like, that's really weird, that wasn't there before. So then I moved the actual, and I said something, I mentioned a word, I said something, and I turned the device, and then I moved it back, and an animal, which I can only describe as a large quadrupedal animal, but moving with the grace of a cheetah, is moving, and speed and fluidity is moving from my right to left. And I've gone, oh my God, out loud, and whatever this thing is, stops dead and is looking straight at me. And I go, I think I'm having a nervous breakdown. So I moved, and I go to give it to Farmer Brown, and I should never have done that. And by the time I've got it back, the thing had vanished. But the explosive speed, I've never, ever, ever seen a dog run like that, but I've seen cheetahs run like that. I was most focused on research initially on the Hawkesbury area because Chris Coffey gave me so much material. What brought the Grosvale community together was all the work of Chris Coffey. Chris Coffey was working so hard and getting stories in the paper. The good thing about what they were doing was they were working hand in hand with the council. The council would keep them updated. What was most interesting about the Hawkesbury was the sheer volume of reports coming out of there, sometimes by people with different forms of science degrees. The problem is too, that with a lot of phenomena, fringe phenomena especially, with very little reports, that's not too good. But the other problem is, too many reports almost looks like some sort of social contagion is going on as well. It was suggested by one psychologist that it was all just mass hysteria, but the problem was he actually saw the cat later on. It was just really hard to believe that all these people are completely bonkers mad and misreporting it. The fact that someone like Keith Hart, who's a vet who specialised in large felix like leopards in Africa, was claiming to see prints that are reminiscent of the African area, obviously it's telling you that the prints are leopard. I enjoy a mystery, so I don't have sort of any philosophical belief that because I start to investigate a mystery, I should have to solve it. There's something here, I don't know what it is, and it doesn't make any sense.
Mike joined forces with the group from Grosvale to assist with their research as they continued to send away paw prints, hair samples and scats to be analysed in a lab. Some of the results were questionable.
We had a scat here. I got probably 20 feet from my front door where the tree had been scratched in a perfect big hand mark. Underneath there was the most revolting scat. The smell was unbelievable. You could clearly see masticated feathers, wool from a sheep and chunks of bone. Now we sent that away to the lab and it came back. It is not dog, fox or feral cat. It has come from a large carnivore. As there are no grooming hairs, I cannot say. DPI sent a piece of that same scat to the same lab and it came back as a dog vomit, right? So then it was Rural Lands sent a piece away and it came back as the first one. It is not dog, fox, feral cat, blah, blah. Okay? So somebody put it under the carpet. Then you find out that only cats can masticate feathers. A dog can't. If a dog eats a feather, it comes out the same as it went in. They can't masticate feathers.
Frustrated with the inconsistent results, the Grosse-Vale group decided they would not only test the lab's credibility, but also their honesty.
I collected a leopard scat from a private zoo and sent it away, and it came back as a dog that had been eating swamp wallaby. These animals were only fed beef and horse, right? It was the real thing, but it came back as dog. This is the same lab, just all full of lies. Oh, I was not happy. Yes.
The scat that I sent them was reeking of ammonia, so anyone with half a brain would have known it's cat, 100%. I even was a bit pissed off when I sent it, going, I just thought you should have sent it, should have waited till it was dry, because the ammonia was just reeking. So the two specialists would have known straight away, in their heart of hearts, unless they were completely brain dead, it had to be a large cat. But they took the easy route, the safe route, and gave what the government wanted, which was just dog.
I personally spoke with the person who did that testing at that time, and I said, well, why wouldn't you say it's a cat? And I got told it wasn't worth their job to do that. In Australia, I think if you're a scientist and your livelihood depends on finances from government departments and you disagree with the formal line, and this could be with any formal line with any subject matter, I think you hang yourself out in a place that might be difficult. Over time, we sent casts, we sent photographs, we sent portions of animal carcasses that had slobber all over them off for assessment. We sent bones off for assessment, and the number of times these things disappeared or DNA inclusive, like the bones had clear teeth marks of something big having chewed it. We sort of thought, well, maybe somebody could take a look at that. Well, those bones just disappeared, never came back. We had a deer carcass in a tree that got eaten out significantly. There was a portion of its neck that had an incredible amount of slobber on it. We engaged a person from the local council so that there would be a government connection the whole way. This council official came and cut the slobbered portion off the animal and sent it off for testing. DNA testing inconclusive. I just wonder what that test actually showed, what the animal really was. If national parks were to state that there are large cats in the Australian bush, something would have to be done, money would have to be spent to try and get rid of them. And that's money that these departments don't have. So the simplest solution is to deny, and then they don't have to spend any money.
Taylor has spent much of his time in the great outdoors and knows the Hawkesbury quite well. One day, out river fishing with his dad, Taylor's curiosity on big cats in the area was put to rest.
Now, I've grown up in the Hawkesbury my entire life, and I'm an avid outdoorsman. I've hiked and fished every square inch of this place. The 15th of December it was, because I wrote it down, 15th of December 2019. My dad and I do a lot of fishing, and we were down the back of a bloke's property about 6 k's upstream from a recreational spot on the Grosse River. not a lot of people head up that way. It also means we see a lot of animals, and especially during the bushfires, a lot of the animals and stuff get pushed downstream because the Grose Valley went up in flames. But Dad and I were down the back of the property, and the Grose River down there is quite low. So you walk up you can actually walk straight up the middle of the river over sandbanks. The river winds along, and either side of the river, it's quite bushy, and then it goes into cliffs either side. So you're in this big, almost like a big gorge sort of thing. It's gorgeous. It was late afternoon. It's about 5 in the afternoon, so it's still daylight. During the summer, it doesn't get dark till 8:30, so it's still daylight. Dad and I are walking downstream. We had a good day fishing, but we heard some rustling up on the ridge line to our left-hand side. We both stopped dead in our track. We look up to our left-hand side, and out from behind this big main tree, we see this huge black figure dart down across the ridge line. What we saw was a huge black cat, and it had the typical high hip bones. It was jet black in color. I'd never seen anything darker. It was so dark, and it had this extremely long tail, like huge. It was long and thick, like it was anything like I've ever seen before. I've seen a lot of wallabies, dark wallabies. I've seen a lot of dogs, and it was nothing like that. And the real thing for me personally was the way it ran through the shrub. I mean, it true hardy Blue Mountains bushland out there. It's not easy to get through, and dogs when they run, they bound over things. This thing just had its head down, high hips, and it was like lightning. It just straight through the bush like it knew where it was going. It was unbelievable. I've seen my fair share of wild animals out in the bush in my travels, and this was huge. It was a bit bigger than a Labrador, I'd say, a bit bigger than a Golden Retriever. It was massive. My dad's pretty, he's pretty, there's a bit of an answer for everything sort of stuff. He loves a story, but he's very matter of fact, and there's always, could have been this, could have been that. But we looked at each other and just gleaming and went, no way. And he said, you know what that was, don't you? And I said, I reckon I do. And we both went, that was Blue Mountains Panther. It was so big, and it was fantastic to be able to have experienced it too.
I spoke briefly with Taylor's dad, Chris, who was quite happy to back Taylor's story, but not without the usual father and son tongue-in-cheek first.
To be honest, mate, I think he's seeing things. No, just kidding. No. It was an interesting day. It was good. Taylor is a mad keen fisherman, and he convinced me to hike down into the Grose River to do a little bit of fishing with him. So there was a fair bit of bushfire activity going on up in the mountains, and we could see a lot of smoke around the place. But we decided we'd hike in, not too far into the bush, but just far enough to get into a really nice, secluded part of the Grose River up there, which was really lovely. So we're just casting around for bass in around all the sort of various rock formations and so forth. I kind of, Taylor and I were standing together, but then I moved a little bit back downstream, about 40 or 50 metres away from him, and all of a sudden we sort of heard this bit of rustling up in the bush, and it felt like quite a bit of heavy rustling. We hadn't seen any other wildlife around that day, and so the rustling was loud enough, obviously, to catch our attention, and we both sort of looked up from different parts of the river. We both looked up in the same direction, and what I saw, probably about 15 to 20 metres up the bank, it was quite a steep bank. There was this, just big, large, black, feline-looking animal, standing there in the bit of a clearing, and there was, to me, it was clear as day that it wasn't a dog. Also, the shape was completely different to a dog, and it went off at quite a rapid pace, actually, almost lithe in its movements, the way it sort of moved through the bush. And we sort of looked at each other and went, holy shit, that's the Panther. Yeah, we were pretty confident around what we saw, it's fair to say.
Matt got a good look at something big and black one day on the Putty Road, and reckons he knows where it may have come from.
It was around either 99 or 2000 on a trail in the Colo Heights area. I was driving along the trail, quite a hilly terrain, and I saw this animal run down the hill across the trail and then disappear. And so I floored the truck to see if I could get close to see it, and it must have heard me and turned and taken off back up the hill. The rear hind quarters, if you like, of this animal were quite distinct, jet black, and it had the long flowing tail, and it was gone in a flash. Look, I would have been within 50 metres of it. I've got the image of this beast sort of emblazoned in my mind. I'll never forget it. I've run a pest control business for over 25 years, so I've trapped and removed feral cats. I've seen big feral cats in the bush, like really big ferals in the outback, and it was much bigger than that. Like, without sounding like a fool, it was a panther or panther-like animal. Like I said, it was jet black. It had the long flowing tail, quite a decent build to it as well. I had an old friend who was a taxidermist. He wanted me to take him out to this Frenchman's property. I think it was out of Mulgoa. I got a tour through his house and around the grounds of his private animal collection. Someone was putting pressure on him to reduce his numbers because they were all having babies. Rumour has it is that he was selling kittens and cubs and God knows what else to whoever could take them.
Anthony is a biologist from the Hawkesbury region and was called out one day to investigate some unusual stock loss.
My best mate and I went out there, and in this woman's front yard, a mate of mine and myself found the goat in the tree. The goat was on an overhanging branch about 3 metres. From at least 5 metres away, the smell of feline piss was overwhelming. And the pug mark in the tree was a cracker. And here's this enormous pile of shit. It was not dog shit, and we can say it's not dog shit because we sent it off. The scats were not consistent with canid feces because of the way that the matter was not indigested. But because of the absence of grooming hair, she couldn't commit to it being big cat. But she said it's not consistent with canid. It's easier to rule out human intervention with the smell of cat pee and the poo and the pug marks. Mostly rule out human intervention.
With so many sightings coming out of the Hawkesbury area, the Department of Primary Industries was forced to investigate. Having no one qualified in their own team to conduct an investigation on exotic wildlife, they reached out to a wildlife biologist by the name of Dr. Johannes Bauer. Dr. Bauer had spent years in Asia studying wildlife, including big cats. But unfortunately for the DPI, this time, they chose the wrong expert.
I became the cat specialist because, I knew much more about it than most Australians because I worked in Asia for probably 20 years. And of course, I'm a wildlife biologist and a conservation biologist, so actually I probably do know what I'm talking about. I went down for that first memorable trip where we actually saw quite a number of people around Richmond. And when you really are presented with evidence like that in such number, you just actually either think somebody's making either a very elaborate hoax and sets you up, or there is obviously something which you can't quite understand with the present level of knowledge. The hoax can be probably nowadays discarded because there are probably only few people in the world who would go to that type of length. And I really have got no reason to believe that these people lied. Something has dragged up these goats up in the tree, really, and I think what comes to mind is a leopard. The evidence which was presented to me was such that I wrote that letter.
I asked Dr. Bauer if he could read me the conclusion to his investigation in the Hawkesbury.
Difficult as it seems to accept the most likely explanation of the evidence is the presence of a large feline predator. Yeah, well, I kept it as general as I could. In this area, most likely a leopard. I don't find it surprising. That was a bit too volatile. I think they didn't want to promote that document. Yeah. I think the evidence was pretty. It was triangulation, really. It was not just a leopard actually having a goat up on the tree and perhaps various reliable sightings of some people. It only sounds so unbelievable if you're an Australian. But leopards, they turn up everywhere. At that time, I think people were they were scared. And I'm actually glad if I was of any help to them and gave them a little bit of credit, really. And I think actually what was the most annoying part was that nobody took them serious,
Although no immediate action was taken after Dr. Bauer's investigation, 4 years later his report made an appearance in a 2003 review on big cats in the Blue Mountains by the Department of Primary Industries, and the conclusion from this report reads as follows. Nothing found in this review conclusively proves the presence of free-ranging exotic large cats in New South Wales, but this cannot be discounted and seems more likely than not on available evidence. In 2008, the DPI constructed another big cat report, and Dr. Bauer's investigation didn't even get a mention. It also reconstructed its own conclusion when mentioning the 2003 report. From the first page, it was clear what the motive for this new report was: to sweep this whole story of big cats under the rug once and for all.
DPI really, they only, well, as the saying goes, they got dragged there kicking and screaming. They really didn't want to get involved at all. The only reason why they got involved was because they really were worried that somebody would take them to court after they'd been injured or killed by a leopard. And that certainly was a scenario which was possible, really. Their major motivation was really to not find anything. All the documents they produce are heavily doctored and censored, where you certainly don't get much truth from that place. It's mostly motivated by fears of liability. They didn't even want to debunk it, they just want to cover their back. And I think for a while, actually, they were really worried that one of the panthers might attract people once. And because, of course, then actually they could have been, they could have been attacked for negligence. So I think they really just the biggest motivation was just actually to be shown that they didn't were negligent, really, which isn't a great motivation, really. If I look at the prey base of a lot of leopards in their natural habitats in Asia, they're living in paradise, because a kangaroo is obviously the ideal prey species for a leopard, a grey kangaroo, really, and as we know, we got quite a lot of those ones around still, thank God. Normal people would never see a leopard in Australia. I don't think actually hikers would come across them, because they would have smelt them or heard them miles before. I would say that. If you talk about Wollomai and all these areas and stuff like it, if there is only a couple of leopards around there, and they would be essentially very rare, yeah, of course you wouldn't see him. Of course he's got a lot to eat. It's just so elusive.
A name that repeatedly kept popping up as a person of interest in my research was a herpetologist named Richard Wells. One of Richard's specialties is taxonomy. Taxonomy is the science of naming, describing and classifying living organisms like plants and animals. Being an expert in this field, one can only assume your levels of observation have to be of a high standard.
I had thousands and thousands of field trips behind me before I even got involved in taxonomy, and I really was providing specimens for museums and universities and so on. In those field trips, I also became aware of many other animals in the process, and signs, traces and so on of animals. You know, the big cat thing became something that I became aware of while I was actually looking out for reptiles. Reptile people are more like commandos. You know, they're sneaking through the bush, because reptiles and amphibians, particularly reptiles, they require very stealthy search patterns. You've got to be very, very, very cunning and clever how you find a lot of them. I used to see tracks of big cats, and for many years. Some years later, when I was living on the Hawkesbury, there was a lot of talk about big cats, and I tried to alert the national parks. I asked the national parks, because I was working for them at the time, did they know anything about these big cat sightings? And I got a very mixed response, mostly just disbelief and incredulity that I would even consider that such a thing could exist. But I'd always seen these signs, and I was thinking to myself, they're a bit too dismissive, these national parks expert rangers, and often you'd often get expert mammals people in national parks who are very intelligent, very, very capable people, but they'd say things like, "Oh, listen, we would have found mammals, we would have found these big cats on our mammal surveys if they were out there." But they say they could have easily seen them when most of them had no experience with big cats. Is a bit of a joke, because they would never have known they were there if they were in the areas where they were carrying out their surveys. In fact, I have been on surveys where mammal experts were walking around looking for mammals, and they're among the best mammalogists in Australia, and none of them saw me watching them. And as far as I can see, if they couldn't even see me watching them, they'd have no hope of finding a leopard. And the other thing they used to say, well, if there's plenty of big cats, why haven't they been killed on the road, and so on and so forth? And I used to say, well, hang on a minute, I've done thousands of trips. And I'll tell you now, and every herpetologist that you want to speak to will tell you the same thing about cats. Feral cats are supposedly in their millions in the bush, right? And they are, right? There's millions of them. When you find a dead cat on the road, a feral cat on the road, it's a very rare event. And most of the time, 99% of the time, 99.999% of the time, a dead cat on the road is near a farm or in an urban area. You rarely see them in good bushland areas. It is so rare to find a dead cat on the road in an area of bushland, and that's a feral cat. A leopard, you would have Buckley's chance of finding it. They are so clever. And I saw what I believe was a black cat, leopard-like large cat, jump across the Great Western Highway, and I reported to the Department of Agriculture the first one I saw was in the 90s, and I referred it to the Department of Agriculture I was at near Lithgow, and I said I was on the way to out west back to the Central West, and I had the car on low beam going on the Great Western Highway, and it was at night. I can't remember it's about 9:30, something like that at night. And I had the car on low beam, and there was no oncoming traffic, so I flipped the high beam on straight away, and I caught it in the high beam, leaping across the road in just a few leaps. And it was no doubt it was a big black cat. And I thought, what the hell? I would never have seen it had I not put the high beam on. Now, this thing was waiting, obviously, for jumping across the road when there was in the dark, not in the light of a car. And I just managed to scoop it in that sense. Now, that was definitely a sighting. And I so reported it. And then a guy from the Department of Agriculture sent me a lot of internal documents that had been created by various departments about this very problem, these big cats, of all these sightings, and how they thought they were there, and they were a bit concerned about they might have to arm rangers with guns and so on and so forth if these things are breeding and so on and so forth. So I thought, hang on, they know about this behind the scenes. And yet what are they actually doing? Up until about 1960, there were no restrictions on leopards and lions and tigers and jaguars and just about any cat in the world being brought into Australia as a pet. I mean, they were regularly brought into Australia, or periodically brought into Australia, and weren't rare in the 19th century by any means. You could buy a baby tiger or a baby leopard or a baby jaguar, and they were imported into Australia as pets. Now, that was right up till about 1960, and I mean, there were still people with pet leopards in the 1950s. There was no doubt about that. So where did they go? Did they all just die quietly, like, a budgie in a cage that no one wants to feed anymore? I don't know. And they could, when you keep animals in captivity, it's not unusual for them to get away periodically, Thousands upon thousands of people have reported them. It's not like only a couple of people have seen them. They're much more common than flying saucer observations, and they're lumped in the same basket with flying saucers, yowies, and politicians that love us.
Dr. Bauer and I had many long and interesting conversations over the months we'd been in touch. Well, it was mainly him talking and me listening. It wasn't until one of our more recent conversations that I realised Dr. Bauer had seen something himself years after the DPI asked him to investigate the Hawkesbury sightings. He'd been holding out on me.
Did I ever tell you that I had by myself an inexplicable encounter? I was working actually with a person, and he's one of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life. His name is Richard Wells. He's a phenomenally intelligent man. From an experience of the wild and from talking around, actually, we were working 4 weeks actually every night, walking around the forest doing stuff. Mostly looking for frogs actually, where he also knows phenomenal stuff about.
We were on another survey for a coal mine of all things. Yohas, Professor of Biology, a very capable biologist, a real gentleman and a scholar in zoology. He was working with me, or we were working together, on endangered species surveys, and we came around into a new track. We were heading one particular direction, and we turned into a side track to go down to one of our study sites.
It was a sandy road. The vegetation on both sides was probably 1.5 meters high. It was mostly sort of heath. Visibility was very good. It was a clear night. Temperature was probably about 10-15 degrees.
And as we turned in, the lights hit.
In front of the car, we saw a black animal crossing.
And both of us just looked at us in disbelief. And I said, well, there we are. You know, because he'd been hired by the New South Wales government to verify or to assess the likelihood of them occurring in the state.
We just looked at each other. I said, what the hell was that, Richard? Well, we only saw it probably for a few seconds, 5 seconds, but we're pretty experienced people, both of us. And I said, Richard, what the hell was that? And he said, Jesus, you tell me. I've got no idea. Was it a panther, he said. I said, look, I'm not quite sure. Richard was tending towards a panther. So we actually started the process of elimination. We certainly both agreed completely this wasn't a kangaroo. It was completely different. But it didn't run like a pig. It wasn't a deer, that's for sure. It was a predator of sorts. And it was actually, honestly, it was a sighting which I thought about for a long time. And I could never explain it. Anyway, we both decided afterwards, and we actually talked about it all the time, actually. We still actually, when we ring, actually, we still talk about that animal. But simply by process of elimination, actually, the only thing which could have been was a bear or a black panther. Would have been a small bear, but I don't think it was a bear. I think it moved very fast and very lithe. Yeah, not like a bear and not like a pig. I've seen lots of bears in the wild too. So it's really, I just eliminated. I just thought, I was just reluctant to say panther, and Richard wasn't. He said, yeah, that was a panther. But we actually laughed about it ourselves because it was so incredible. You would probably have to put it in as a reliable sighting. Richard has enormous experience.
A big feral cat the size of a leopard stretches the credibility of cat growth, domestic cat growth, to almost absurd levels. I mean, to think that a domestic cat could reach the size of a leopard, I think Elon Musk has got more chance of driving to Mars in his electric cars than he has of finding a domestic cat that big. But Elon will probably try, and so would other people. So, I'm not sure what the hell they are, but there is a big black cat, and it is. And now I've seen two of them, plus I've seen large scratches on trees and dead goat jammed up in the branches of trees about 25, 30 foot from the ground, and tracks all over the place. I mean, really, when you see cat piss on a tree, it's usually quite a small, little mark, and it's quite a distinctive smell, as you probably know. Well, when a big cat piss is seen on the bottom of a tree, it's like a bucket of cat piss that's been poured on it, and it leaves you no doubt that no little cat did that. I've got my own particular view, and that is it's a big black cat. What it is, I'm not that sure, but there's something out there, and it's widespread in its distribution. It goes all the way. It may even be in both east and west of the continent, from what the reports are, and right up the whole of eastern Australia's Great Dividing Range. They're right through, and wherever you go, people who don't know one another have similar reports. Now, is that just a product of just, pub whispering? I don't think so. I think there's something there, and what I've seen indicates to me that there's something big and it's black and it's potentially dangerous, so you want to be darn careful.
One of these fellows actually has to find a panther once. I hope it's going to be you.
The animals were released by an organisation called the Victorian Acclimatisation Society. They were responsible for creating the Melbourne Zoo, and they released 4 species: chital deer, ostrich, African lion and puma. They were released at Wilson's property up near Horsham.
If you're enjoying Missing Panther, please tell a friend about it and make sure you subscribe to keep updated on each episode. You can follow Missing Panther on Facebook and Instagram to come along this podcasting journey with us. If you get a spare moment, pop us a quick review on Facebook or Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to help support the show, go to our website, missingpanther.com.au. Hit the About button and scroll down to forward your much appreciated donation. If you'd like to get your hands on Mike and Rebecca's book, Australian Big Cats, go to amazon.com.au and get yourself a copy. If you love big cat stories, you won't regret the purchase. A big thank you to all the guys from Grossvale, Ken, Keith, Karen, Mike and Chris, for sharing with me your hard work and dedication to the Hawkesbury community over the years, as well as the highs and lows of pursuing this wonderful yet painfully elusive animal. If you believe you've seen a panther or a big cat, or even if you believe you know how they got here, go to our website missingpanther.com.au. Get us through the contact page. Missing Panther is edited and narrated by me, Ben Bede. Music is by Warwick Party. Mastering by Paul Gomersall.